I've got to talk to you about Ilhan Omar's daughter, Eliana, because she's made herself a public face of these protests. You're shocked. Shocked, I know. And she's at Barnard, which is right next to Columbia, and is participating in this sit-in, this nonstop, off again, on again, I guess is a more accurate term, but pernicious sit-in. And she, along with the other students who were not complying with the police directives and so on, came out, got the full Vogue. Is it Teen Vogue treatment?
It's Teen Vogue. Teen Vogue.
It's always Teen Vogue. And look, here she is. She's such a hero. The headline, Isra Hirsi, Ilhan Omar's daughter, on Columbia arrests, Barnard suspension, Palestine protests. The subtitle is, the longtime social justice activist and Barnard Jr., 21, talks to Teen Vogue about the 48 hours following Columbia University's decision to send NYPD into a campus Palestine solidarity encampment. That's not exactly how it went down. But she decides to paint her time there as like she was basically just kicked out of the last homeless shelter in New York with no food and no roof over her head, and says as follows. We were reading our email and it said we had 15 minutes to go get our shit if we wanted it. And we'd have to go with a public safety escort. I was like, I'm not going to do that. But I was a little frantic, like, where am I going to sleep? Where am I gonna go? And also, all of my shit is thrown into a random lot. It's pretty horrible. I don't know when I can go home, and I don't know if I ever will be able to. I mean, could you spare me? I've only got crocodile tears for this person who was out there leading all this shit. And then to double down, she goes, of course, on MSNBC. And listen to this. Now, I want the audience to pay particular attention to something we discussed last week, which is her reference to the alleged chemical weapons that she claims were deployed against her. We know the truth thanks to the Free Beacon, Eliana's publication. Listen.
Do you feel that you are being targeted because of the fact that it is in solidarity with Palestinians and against what Israel is doing to Palestinians?
Oh, this is 100% targeted. Every single protest that we have, there's a group of counter-protesters that bring all of their items, their flags and things like that, and they're not seen as having unsanctioned protests or really receive the kind of disciplinary warnings that many of our fellow organizers receive just for being seen at these protests. And so there is definitely some hypocrisy here, especially you can kind of see it with the students that were sprayed us with the chemical weapons and the fact that there's no public information as to what happened to them. But rather the university is actively discussing what is happening to the students here and making it a whole public spectacle rather than when we haven't done anything to physically harm students, whereas those that sprayed those chemical weapons physically harmed students.
Care to comment on that, Eliana?
Let's just start with the facts. The chemical weapon in question was a fart spray purchased on Amazon for $26 called Liquid Ass. Okay. And
I hear they have that in New York State Supreme in the Trump trial too. It was seen.
And she says nothing happened to these students. These students who sprayed that were suspended, which is why they are now suing Columbia University for accusing them of spraying a chemical weapon. They were suspended immediately. Columbia President Minouche Shafik testified before the Columbia University Senate and said that these students had used chemical weapons. These students were former IDF soldiers and then came to Columbia. So she spread this misinformation, and the fact that this was not any kind of chemical weapon, but in fact, this harmless fart spray purchased off Amazon surfaced in their lawsuit where they are litigating their suspension. So what she said, that we can't protest, but they can, and nothing happens to them, is total and utter bullshit.
She's on MSNBC and got a spread in Teen Vogue. They got suspended and she got a slot on MSNBC. And
our protests appear to violate the policies. Either the protests violate the policies or they do not. Her protests her behavior violated the university policy. Beyond that, her mother, apple doesn't fall far from the tree, was questioning the Columbia University president, weighing in on behalf of the protesters, and never disclosed to the American public that her daughter is one of the protesters who's going to suffer the consequences. One would think, at least in the interest of propriety, that Representative Omar would say, my daughter's on the campus and she's one of these agitators. And no. She didn't say a word about that. But in the interest, Omar was actually the one who got Columbia President Shafiq to say there are no anti-Jewish protests that I've seen, and allowed representatives.
Oh, you're right. She was the one who asked the question.
Have there been anti-Muslim protests? Shafiq said no. She said, have there been anti-Jewish protests? Shafiq said no. And then Elise Stefanik stepped in and said, I'm sorry, you testified that there have been no anti-Jewish protests. Would you consider death to Zionists? Is that anti-Jewish? And Shafiq had to backpedal and say,
and death to Jews.
Actually, death to Jews. They weren't labeled anti-Jewish, like when the notice that they were happening went out. They just, devolved in that, they just evolved in that direction. And then her three co-panelists, the chairman of the board of trustees, Jay Carney's wife, Claire Shipman, and David Scheiser, whatever his name is, they all contradicted her and said, of course, there have been anti-Jewish protests on this campus. So anyhow, what she said is a total and utter lie.
I think we're being too hard on Ilhan Omar's daughter, who, let's face it, for a brief period of time, her uncle became her stepdad when her mom married her brother. So it's, that kind of stuff can cause lasting damage, which can manifest itself in a number of ways, Emily. I'll tell you why the campus cops are not throwing the Israeli protesters off campus. It's pretty clear. It's depicted, for example, in this soundbite from Columbia with the Jewish students sought for. They're singing, they're waving American flags and Israeli flags.
Here, they're not covering their faces.
No faces covered. This is why they don't get bothered, Emily. They're not doing anything. And I realize Israel right now is in the midst of a bombing campaign against a group that attacked it viciously on 10/7, which is controversial. But these students are getting protested. These Americans are getting harassed. That's where we enter. Well, this show isn't a big foreign policy show. This is probably not where you come if you want daily, 501 foreign policy updates. But we get into it when it crosses over into what's happening to us, right? To Americans. And this war is a great example of that. We're not doing daily updates on this bombing campaign or that bombing campaign. There are shows for that. But you target Americans for their beliefs or just because they happen to be Jewish, and all Americans should be standing up against you. That you're not allowed in the United States to do this to a group on a college campus.
Well, and I think our standards for our campuses have just slipped to the point where we're almost numb. But, to watch this happen, again, at like temples of inquiry, like the American university system used to be the pride of the country. It used to be the envy of the world. And what we see now, again, people, they burn American flags, they take American flags down. Some of this is protected speech, et cetera, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about people saying death to Jews. We're talking about people saying Al-Qassam's next target. We're talking about, in some cases, some very obvious incitement, violence, and stuff that goes well beyond what our colleges, why they enshrined free speech, free expression, and free inquiry into their missions. And that is for the purpose of bettering our society. What we are seeing is not bettering our society. And if you are going to practice civil disobedience, and if you are going to practice completely non-civil disobedience and then go on MSNBC and cry about the consequences for you, which so far appear to be like maybe losing some stuff you were camping with, but also getting an MSNBC slot, a spread in Teen Vogue, all kinds of plaudits from the media, then you've completely lost the plot here.
As we approach another critical election, many Americans are concerned. Recent studies reveal that an astonishing 56% of citizens report feelings of anxiety or dread about the upcoming election. But I want to tell you about AMAC, the Association of Mature American Citizens. AMAC is more than a senior organization. During these challenging times, they fight for common sense and for the U.S. to return to traditional American values. Visit amac.us/Megyn today to get an exclusive election year special, a 4-year AMAC membership for just $30. As an AMAC member, you not only enjoy money-saving benefits, but also the AMAC magazine, free Social Security and Medicare advice, a trusted voice in Washington, and a community of like-minded patriots. Take advantage of this election year special, 4 years for just $30, and be part of the solution. Join now at amac.us/Megyn. That's amac.us/Megyn. Hey, thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.